If you want 24-hour action, you can't beat Moscow. This is Russia's city that never sleeps. Shops, bars and restaurants open day and night, and streets that are always full of people. But if you're tired of the hustle and bustle, you don't have to go far to see a whole different side of the country.
This place sums up modern Moscow pretty well. Hundreds of cars are gridlocked just behind me, and you can see some of the huge skyscrapers that seem to be springing up all over the city. But just a few hundred kilometers away, there are still places where people live a much more simple and traditional way of life. And that's where I'm heading.
It never hurts to get a little culture in your life, and Russia's Golden Ring cities are packed with it. They form a circle from the northeast of Moscow and are some of the country's most ancient and important historical places. Even though we couldn't visit them all, we were on a journey that gives a real cross-section of what the route has to offer. Suzdal, a sacred site for the Orthodox Church, Vladimir, one of Russia's medieval capitals, and Krustalny, where they make some of the country's most beautiful products. And once we were on the road, it wasn't long before the first one was in sight, and we were driving towards our first landmark.
Just to show you we've arrived in the Golden Ring, we're about to pass by Vladimir's famous Golden Gates, which for centuries were the main entrance to the city.
But we weren't stopping. I wanted to get out into the countryside, and that meant heading straight for Suzdal. But little did I know that my dreams of getting back to nature were about to come true. Literally.
Now, life in the Suzdal countryside is about as peaceful and tranquil as you could wish for in Russia. But we're heading to a place where they've got 2,500 mouths to feed, and I imagine it's going to be anything but quiet.
Or should I say beaks to feed? This is Suzdal's goose farm. It's run by the local research institute, and it's directly responsible for the survival of several endangered breeds.
We began putting geese breeds together 30 years ago, when some of them were on the verge of extinction. Scientists were talking about the need to preserve them. The geese were brought here from all over the country.
And like any busy farm, they're always grateful for an extra pair of hands.
For your breakfast? Go on, you know you want it. Yes, tasty. Breakfast is served, ladies and gentlemen. No one wants to drink with their meal today.
My new feathered friends weren't exactly pleased to see me, but it didn't put them off their food. And while they were enjoying their dinner, I was able to get to know one of the farm's more famous residents.
Now, there are 21 different breeds of goose here on the farm, but this chap is rather special. Now, he is a Tula fighting goose. Now, his breed has been around for over a century, but you don't see them very often today. But he's being very well behaved, I have to say. Maybe no one's told him about Christmas.
It was time for the geese to head inside for the evening, and for us to find ourselves somewhere to stay. And although Suzdal may be small, there's no shortage of guest houses. Our hotel was one of the biggest, and it turned out it also had a bit of a history in the movies.
It's interesting staying in this hotel because it was actually the setting for a famous Soviet film. A lot of strange things went on between these walls, and especially to one guy. It didn't seem to matter where he went, and it was completely impossible to get out.
Fortunately, after a good night's sleep, I did manage to escape, but the weather had a real surprise in store for us.
Now this really is very typically Russian. One day it can be autumn, the next day you wake up and it's already the middle of winter. But at least now we get to see Suzdal the way the guidebooks intended it.
This is one of the country's most ancient towns, and just walking past the old houses and through the quiet streets, you feel as if life has barely changed here in hundreds of years. It's particularly famous for its religious buildings, and if you stop off on a hillside, you can see the onion-domed roofs dotted all over the landscape.
I think Suzdal's tourist industry would probably be pretty happy with this view. Monuments, old buildings, and of course all the cathedrals with the snow. This is about as picture postcard as it gets.
The town's oldest and most famous church is its blue-domed Kremlin. This cathedral was built in the 13th century, but was ransacked by the Tatars before being restored in the early 1500s. Its inside is a dazzling mass of wood and gold, from the huge iconostasis to the tombs of two of Suzdal's most popular saints. A little further up the road, the Euthymiev monastery fortress dominates the landscape. When it was originally built in the mid-14th century, there were just a few wooden buildings here, but it was transformed by generous gifts from the aristocracy. And sometimes, they left more than just money behind.
Just across the river from the monastery is the Pokrovsky convent. Of course, the nuns who live there now are all volunteers, but a few hundred years ago that certainly wasn't the case. If you were a noble woman who managed to upset her husband enough, you might find yourself spending the rest of your days there, and that included the first wives of two of the Russian tsars.
And what kept the unfortunate ladies locked in also kept other undesirables out. Huge walls proved an effective deterrent to enemy invaders, and towers were raised to watch over the town and surrounding areas. Nowadays, it's only the invading tourists that the monastery has to worry about, but every hour they're given a demonstration of the noise that for hundreds of years would have called the townspeople to gather together. Valery is a graduate of Vladimir's prestigious musical college and has been ringing the bells here for more than 20 years. Before he arrived, each of them had to be rung individually, but his elaborate system of ropes and pulleys has turned a six-man performance into a one-man show, and the results are audible for miles around. It's a technique that's taken him years to develop.
I wanted to try and create something that incorporated the spirit of the church and the spirit of the world. In some schools they teach you to play any kind of rhythm, but this is so wrong, because the sound of the bells has to be special. It doesn't have to be complicated. The bells just need to sound right.
And, feeling inspired, I thought I'd have a quick go myself.
Well, you've got to start somewhere, haven't you?
Well, give me a couple of decades to practice, and you never know. But Valery doesn't only take care of the monastery's bell tower, he's also its chief musician, and a specialist in one of the oldest Russian instruments of all, the gusli. The gusli's been around for more than 1,500 years and was at the height of its popularity between the 9th and the 17th centuries. It was a favourite of travelling musicians, who would visit different towns to sing about the old myths and legends. Valery gives regular concerts in the monastery, but admits his music is not exactly authentic.
There aren't many written parties for it, so you have to create it yourself, or to adapt the history yourself and the melodies that have been preserved. The Russian myths are different too now. They're ancient and their language kept changing through the centuries, like in the 19th century, for example, because Russian language changed itself.
But change means little in Suzdal, and that's what people love about it. Its houses and churches are preserved by the government, and it's this glimpse into Russia's past that attracts huge numbers of visitors every year, and what keeps traditional pastimes alive.
I love these.
Yelena and her group of friends sew handmade souvenirs and authentic 18th and 19th century clothing. They're some of her shop's biggest sellers.
People can wear them in normal life. They wear them to weddings in a church, and the wedding guests wear similar shirts or dresses. We use modern fabric, but the style is very old, and it takes us back to our roots. I think you should try it on. Let's see. I think it suits you perfectly.
And when in Rome...
So now I'm in my 19th century best. I have my date. All we need now is to find ourselves a dance festival.
It was a little chilly for dancing, but finding a slice of old village life in Suzdal wasn't hard. The town has collected a series of old buildings to make its own architectural museum, complete with windmills, and even some of our friends from the day before.
Walking through this museum, you get a real feel of what life must have been like here in the 18th and 19th centuries. The old houses, the churches, and especially this big well. You can really see what it must have been like to live here 200 years ago.
Although one feature in the village was a little out of place.
It's not quite so authentically 18th century.
Leaving the tractor to fight a losing battle against the snow, it was time for us to say goodbye to Suzdal and make our way to Russia's medieval capital, Vladimir.